So as usual, if you could please find the tasks to complete for today. So you're looking for tasks for U4L2. You can find it under assignments or on the weekly calendar on the Disease and Health homepage. Today's date is the 3rd of December. Rather than putting you into breakout rooms to chat about a random question, we're actually going to start off with a little bit of feedback. I meant to collect some from you earlier, so I'm sorry I haven't done this earlier, but I would like to give you just 10 minutes to complete an anonymous Google form. So I have no way of knowing who typed what, but please just give me your honest feedback about how you think the course is going so far and what you have liked and what you haven't liked. So take 10 minutes just to answer those questions, and we'll come back together once I see that most of you have it done. So let me know if you're not sure what to click on. Go for it. Next on the docket was a homework check. Both of the quizzes, we worked on the history of pandemics in class. I'm seeing 13 responses to that, and the scores all look good. The homework was just reading the Gladwin chapter on bioterrorism. Again, scores are looking great here. I am seeing a couple errors, and just a reminder that if you do get any wrong, you can always take the quiz again to get the maximum score, right? It'll show you which ones you got wrong, and so you can focus on those questions. So I encourage you to just do a retake if you want to get that perfect score there. But any questions or comments on that? Those assignments, anything you got stuck on? Again, hopefully we don't see any bioterrorism events within your lifetime. I will say that one big takeaway for me, again, is the idea of the plague and the rats. I feel like while the rats definitely contribute to the spread, they kind of get unfairly blamed for a lot of that stuff. It is indeed the fleas that were spreading it. I think that's a common misunderstanding. Alrighty then. So the big thing we're going to do today is you guys are going to be guinea pigs for me once again. And we're going to try to use a new program here called Nearpod. Has anyone used Nearpod in a other class at all? Ever heard of it? So it's a program that's sort of like Edpuzzle for slides. It kind of brings a whole bunch of stuff together. I've been using it in my Science 2 class, and it's worked smoothly so far. You guys, I'm gonna try out the video feature with you. But today we're learning about prions. Prion disease, and more specifically mad cow disease and its manifestations in humans. And so what you're going to do is click on the link that's right after step number 4, prion diseases Nearpod. And what that should take you to is a website that's asking for a join code. It'll say enter code. I'm going to share my screen and bring the code up for you now. And then you'll be able to sort of join our lesson. It'll be sort of a slideshow presentation with questions and videos. Takes a minute to load sometimes, so I'll just give it a second to think. All right, there's our join code, JWR7P. Go ahead and enter that. And then it'll give you the option for a name, just like with Kahoot or any of those other programs. Just enter your name or something close to it so I know who everybody is. I just put the join code in the chat as well on Zoom. So if you need to find it there, it'll also be available in the upper left corner of the screen. Let's see how we're doing. We got 9 people in so far. If it's loading slowly for you, if you're not able to join, it's okay. You can find a link to the slides on the tasks to complete list. So you can just open up the Google Slides. And I also have links to the videos that will be included in this below that. So you're welcome to work through those on your own as we work through as well. But hopefully most of us can get on here. I'm seeing 12, we've got 13 people present. Hey, there we go. Alrighty. Okay, let's see how this goes. So this is literally the title from your reading in Gladwin, which you'll be doing tonight as homework. But we're going to talk about mad carnivorous cows shaking cannibals and some good reasons to be a vegetarian. We'll start off with a quick video. Go with all devices. Interesting. So I'm not seeing anything. Is the video playing for you guys? Can I get a verbal check-in?
I don't think so. Not for me, at least.
No? Okay, let's try this again. I'm not sure what I did.
Now it works. Now it works.
Okay.
Can misfold from these really weird proteins called prions. These proteins actually misfold other properly folded proteins, causing an exponential chain reaction of misfolded proteins, and they all end up binding.
Okay, sorry, I'm just curious about how this is working. So are you guys seeing the video like on my screen? Like, did it just pause, or are you all watching it on your own?
I think both, because I can see it on your screen, but I can also like play it by myself.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think I chose to play it on all devices. Not sure how to set that, but okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and play it on my screen and see what happens. There are two questions that should pop up, so let's try that and see what happens.
And they all end up binding together. In an infected person, these proteins are located in the brain and cause neural issues and death quite quickly. These neurological disorders are known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs for short. They are a group of the rarest diseases and have the highest mortality rate on the planet, with 100%. There are no known cures and no treatments available. TSEs are extremely scary. Did I mention that these proteins can't be denatured by proteases, enzymes, heat, radiation, and even autoclaves, which heat up to 134 degrees Celsius in a pressurized steam chamber for 18 minutes and are meant to kill any and all bacteria and viruses? So
Okay. Interesting. Well, let's just say start activity. Is everyone seeing a question now in front of them?
Yeah.
Cool. Give it a go. All right, I think we're waiting on just one other answer, but statistics are looking good. Let's see if I click share solution. Hopefully you're all seeing that the reason why prions are very scary is all of these. They have a 100% fatality rate, so I guess this actually sets them above rabies. So prion diseases are higher than rabies in terms of being the deadliest known diseases. Caused by proteins resistant to heat, irradiation, disinfectants, and there's other stuff we'll build up too, but all right, so now if I click next, nope, that's not what I want to do. I want the video to keep playing. Okay.
So now that I've scared you, how do you get this horrific disease? It's quite complicated, and of course more research needs to go into it, but there are several ways we think we can get it. It starts off knowing that there is a cow version of the disease. You've probably heard of it, mad cow disease. If humans eat beef infected with the prions and the prion makes it to the brain, it can start causing the disease. It's also thought that if humans come in contact with manure or urine from the infected cows, they have a chance of being infected with the prions. The cows get it the same way humans do, by eating infected meat. The good news is that the US banned the practice of feeding cattle other cow parts in 1997. Kuru is another version in which human cannibalism can cause it. As gross as this might sound, it's mostly the people who eat the brain. There's also an even rarer genetic version. Personally, I think the genetic version is by far the scariest. It causes progressively worsening insomnia, which leads to delirium and a confused state of dementia. You get so sleepy that you go crazy and eventually die. Luckily, TSEs are extremely rare and only affect about 1 out of every million people each year. Even though prions and the diseases they cause are extremely scary, we have a lot of preventative measures to keep them hopefully out of the population. More research needs to be done on the prions to understand the ways to combat them and possible treatments for the issues they cause. Just be glad that your proteins didn't decide to go rogue.
Okay. All right, hopefully everyone's seeing a question in front of them again. For our next video, I'll definitely keep it to this device instead of all devices. So give this question a go. The genetic form of prion disease can cause fatal familial insomnia. Meaning what? Okay, waiting on one last answer. Okay, share the solution here. It is exactly what it sounds like. Insomnia, hopefully all of you are familiar with, is the inability to sleep. And yes, this is super scary. Basically, the genetic form, you can develop one where you literally die from lack of sleep. Your brain is unable to get down into REM cycles. And sounds pretty frightening to me. Okay. All right. Again, I'm still figuring this out. Everyone now seeing prion diseases in front of them? Slide. Can I get a verbal confirmation? Can't see you guys.
Yes.
Yep, sweet. Okay, so let's slow it down. Let's break down some of the stuff that was in that video that he was talking about quite fast. Prion diseases, the fancy name is transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Spongiform meaning it's punching holes in your nervous system. Encephalopathies is referring to brain damage. So this is what brain tissue looks like when you have prion diseases. They're essentially these sort of empty holes that form in your brain matter. Your neurons get damaged or destroyed, and obviously this leads to neurodegenerative disorders. So empty holes in the brain, that's the spongy appearance. It has a 100% fatality rate, but it is incredibly rare, right? We don't see this disease very often, especially in humans. In sheep, it was first identified as known as scrapie, and we think this is kind of the source that has now spread to most other mammals. Cows get what's called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, which was more popularly known as the mad cow disease. And in humans, it manifests itself in a variety of different forms, but the most common one is called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. And there's a bunch of versions of this. There's inherited CJD, there's like a variable CJD. So and the other one is Kuru, which we'll take a close look at both of these. Those are just two of them. There's a bunch of other examples actually, but we'll stick with just those two common ones. A couple characteristics that were mentioned in the video that I think make it kind of scary. Prion diseases have very long incubations, which means once these infectious proteins are in you, it can take months to years to actually show symptoms. So you're kind of like a carrier, almost like with HIV. There is absolutely no immune response. Our immune system is unable to recognize or fight these because they're caused by infectious proteins. This is one of the only known diseases where there's no RNA or DNA component, there's no virus, there's no bacterium. These are just proteins that make you sick. And so they're pretty unique and they're pretty scary because They're resistant to a lot of different stuff. So here's the breakdown that you'll see in your reading. I'm going to try to make this as clear as possible. Prion proteins, or sorry, prions, I should say, prion proteins are natural, right? We make natural, harmless versions of these proteins in our brain. They're referred to as cellular prion proteins, or PRPC. So anytime you see that, PRPC, I want you to think natural and harmless, right? This is a natural part of our body. They're not entirely sure what their job is in our brain. There's speculation that they help with like copper metabolism and toxins and stuff. But the point is, these same proteins can become misshapen, and it's this misshapen version that is very, very harmful. They're referred to as scrapey prion proteins. So anytime you see that PRP SC, the SC is for scrapey, I want you to think misshapen and harmful. That's the kind that you don't want. And those are the kind that are destroying neurons and creating these sort of empty holes. So there's just something weird. There's a fold that goes wrong in the normal harmless protein, and they suddenly become these harmful proteins in our bodies. And so this means that these prion diseases can manifest in a number of different ways. And so you can, again, since it's just protein, there's sort of three options. It can be inherited, which means that there's just some gene mutation that happened in a parent where, again, the gene that was normally making this harmless version suddenly starts making the harmful version, and that gets passed on to children. So you can get it from a parent. It can also be infectious, which means that you typically by ingestion, it's eating meat or brain material that has these harmful proteins in it, and then they move to the brain. And another cool thing about these misfolded proteins is they can then cause normal, harmless proteins to fold into the harmful version. So basically they can transform your other normal proteins into the harmful ones once they're in your body. So all it takes is a little bit of ingestion of these bad proteins. Or again, it could be sporadic, which kind of relates back to inherited in that it's just another gene mutation, right? So a lot of people who get sporadic might pass it on to their children to become inherited as well, but just a random mutation in the gene or some kind of misfolding or structural error suddenly creates these harmful proteins. Again, very rare for this to occur, but these are the different ways that it could be developed and transmitted amongst people. Okay, so now let's take a look at mad cow disease.
If you were around in the 90s, and especially if you lived in the UK, you might remember all the panic about mad cow disease. It's a disorder that's killed thousands of cattle since the 80s and 90s, and because a version of it can also infect humans, a lot of people were really freaked out. Today, thanks to safer farming, it probably isn't anything you need to worry about. And even though scientists still don't know exactly how it works, we can say one thing for sure. Your steak is almost definitely probably not infected. Mad cow disease is the common name for a condition called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE. It's a progressive neurological disease that affects cows, and over time it causes severe brain and nervous system damage, which eventually leads to trouble standing, walking, and changes in mood, like increased aggression and nervousness. The spongiform part of the name just means spongy, because the infection creates a bunch of holes in the cow's brain where its cells should be. The first two cases of BSE were identified in the UK in 1986, but it takes a really long time for symptoms to show up, so scientists think the first infections probably date back to the 70s. During the outbreak's peak in 1993, almost 1,000 new cattle were infected each week, but the number has gone down dramatically since then. BSE is caused by a bizarre, self-replicating protein called a prion. Other pathogens like bacteria and viruses use DNA to make copies of themselves, but a prion is just a deformed version of a normal protein that's found in cell membranes. Sometimes those proteins can go rogue and get bent out of shape, but right now we don't totally understand how or why it happens. And when those proteins become prions, they can bind to other proteins like them and make them bend in the same way. And then those messed up prions corrupt even more proteins, and so on. Clumps of them collect and spread in the brain and nervous system, eventually causing brain damage. But that takes a while, so symptoms usually don't show up until years later. All of that is terrible, but how BSE got started is almost as horrifying. It probably happened because cattle were being fed ground up meat and bones from sheep and other cows. gross. Ugh. There's another prion disease in sheep called scrapie, and it's possible that scrapie prions may have jumped to cows through their food and caused this whole mess. But it's also possible BSE just showed up when a random protein folded the wrong way. No matter how it started, the cattle feed only made things worse, because after cows died of BSE, they were ground up and fed to healthy cows, so the disease kept going. Unfortunately,
All right, give this question a go. What allowed for the rapid spread of harmful prion protein amongst cows in the UK in the early 1990s? All right, looking good. Here's the solution. So cows were being fed ground up meat byproduct, and some of that was infected, and so it began to spread very rapidly through the different farms. How crazy is that? It was called MBM, meat and bone meal. So kind of gross to think. It was ground up. Everything that wasn't used to make meat products right after the slaughtering was basically dried and ground up and fed back to the cows. So they were carnivorous technically.
unfortunately, a version of the disease can infect people too. The human version of BSE is called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or VCJD, and it's also caused by bent prions. We don't know for sure that it comes from eating infected cattle, but since they're both prion diseases and both outbreaks happened around the same time, most scientists think that's the case. Like with mad cow disease, the symptoms of VCJD can take years to show up, but once they do, things move pretty quickly. Brain degeneration happens in just a few months, with symptoms like trembling, dementia, trouble walking, and eventually a coma. Since no cure exists yet, patients usually die within a year. Worldwide, there have been about 230 cases of VCJD, and about 180 of those were in the UK. The rest were mainly in Europe, and there have been only 4 cases in the United States, but they were all picked up overseas. The rate at which people have been getting infected has gone way down since the 90s, but scientists will keep studying it because there are other kinds of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease not caused by cows. Before mad cow disease was a thing, we knew about CJD as a rare condition that could appear if a random protein went bad, usually through an inherited mutation or through medical procedures like transplants. Today, we keep the risk of variant CJD low by giving cows safer food and making sure no nervous system tissue gets into our beef. And even though the risk is small, you also can't donate blood in the US if you spent too much time in high-risk countries or got a blood transfusion in Europe, because there's a chance prions could be spread through blood too. Mainly it's those new farming practices that have really helped get the disease under control. And in 2016, there were no new reports of BSE in cows in the UK for the first time since the outbreak started, which is both exciting and a relief. Also, because mad cow disease is transmitted through nervous system tissue, there's no evidence you can get it from milk or the meat used to make things like hamburgers and steak. So your roast beef is not out to get
All right, give this question a go. How did the mad cow disease outbreak in the UK in the early 1990s change the global meat industry? All right, looking good. Correct answer was indeed B. Meat and bone meal is banned. It was banned, I think, in the EU in 1993 and in the US in 1997. Nervous system organs are now removed before meat is processed. So they usually take the brain and spine out, as well as the lymphatic system too. Any immune parts are also removed. Okay, I find all this really fascinating. So just kind of a brief review of what's going on with mad cow disease. It came to light mostly again in the early 1990s in the UK. That's where they had a massive outbreak. Hundreds of thousands of cows died or had to be killed and couldn't be used for meat or anything else because they were sick. They had this infectious protein inside of them. And again, it was because they were feeding cows other cows. So this food here was meat and bone meal. And so the problem is that if you got these proteins, which are again infectious, that were left over from the slaughtering, those got in the food and then were able to transfer into these other animals because they were eating them. And so it spread really, really rapidly, right? This PRPSC, the scrapey protein version, the harmful version, spread widely and quickly. And so this drastically changed the meat industry, right? We're talking about diseases in history. And I know mad cow disease was kind of a bit of a rave. It honestly has not infected that many people, but it still had a huge impact on human activity. Again, the MBM is now banned. They have changed the slaughtering practices. In fact, the machines have changed, right? Because they had these machines that used to kind of just break down the whole animal rapidly all at once, and now they've got to specifically remove like the nervous system, the lymphatic system before the rest of the animal can be slaughtered. But again, this might be just more motivation to become a vegetarian or avoid meat products in general. Okay, let's talk about the other disease, Kuru. There'll be 2 videos related to this, a little bit shorter.
Australian scientist Professor Michael Alpers has dedicated over 50 years researching Kuru, an incurable brain disease unique to Papua New Guinea.
Kuru was a new disease that was killing lots of people and was a complete mystery.
All right. What was one obvious symptom of Kuru that you could see in that video footage? I know you didn't get to see very much, but hopefully there was something that stood out. Correct answer was B, uncontrolled shaking and twitching. If you noticed in the video, and I'm not talking like at a level of like a seizure or something like that, but a common symptom was just kind of this slow shake, almost like what you would see with advanced Parkinson's. But a lot of them also have an inability to walk or stand. So it kind of varies in severity.
But this obscure disease, found deep within these jungles, holds the key to unlocking vital information for understanding 2 of the world's most frightening diseases, mad cow disease and its human form, variant CJD.
Quite clearly now the outbreak of variant CJD is very closely entwined with Kuru. And although now we're looking at the tip of the first iceberg in Europe, what we're learning from out here is there's much more to come.
It's a medical detective story that unearths cannibalism. And a world of sorcery.
All right, I meant to have one more question on there. I guess it didn't save it, but that's all right. We'll cover it in the next video and slide. Okay, one more short video here. This is from SciShow. Real world zombies.
Spongy brain tissue diseases, it turns out, make you super weird and then eventually dead. Symptoms of these diseases include unsteady gait, deterioration of speech, increased jerkiness of movement, and as the disease progresses, bouts of uncontrollable laughter, urinary and fecal incontinence, you know, the normal zombie stuff. There are, by the way, no cures for prion diseases. You zombify and then you die. So you might be wondering, We humans aren't super accustomed to eating brains or spinal cords or anything, so who even gets a prion disease in the first place? Well, sometimes, very rarely, the proteins can misfold in the brain all by themselves, and sometimes people get stuff like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease because they've gotten a blood transfusion with contaminated blood or had surgery where the surgical implements weren't properly sterilized. But usually people get CJD from eating meat from infected animals, which is why they killed all those cows in the UK back in the day, and why we don't, feed cow brains to cows anymore.
Give this question a try. What are some other ways that prions can spread and infect others? You mentioned a few. Very good. It is all of those. In particular, from what I've been reading in the UK, they've been having a lot of trouble still with contaminated donor blood, which I think is kind of surprising. I don't think recently it's been a problem, but following the UK outbreak, that was another sort of source that they suddenly uncovered and had to deal with.
Back to brain eating, though. We must examine the bizarre case of Kuru, a prion disease found in the Foray people of Papua New Guinea. Until the 1950s, the Forays had a custom of consuming their dead at mortuary feasts. You know, like you do. The men of the tribe customarily ate the muscles of their deceased friend, while women and children ate the brains. Between 1920 and the 1960s, an epidemic of Kuru swept through the Foray people, killing upwards of 200 people a year. Women and children, of course, being the most vulnerable because they ate the most brains. But here's something fascinating. The scientists studying the Foray's Kuru epidemic found that some of the women who had participated in the mortuary feast had a genetic mutation that protected them from experiencing the symptoms of Kuru. They had a resistance to the disease. Researchers studying this genetic resistance believe that this could mean that human ancestors could have been cannibalizing each other as long as 500,000 years ago, which is probably the reason why prion diseases aren't more common. So, we do have cannibalism to thank for at least that one thing. Other good news, when someone dies of a prion disease, in 100% of cases, so far, they have remained.
Cut him off, but I meant to say remained dead. All right, strangely, we can thank our cannibalistic ancestors for what? Very good. It is a genetic resistance to the symptoms of prions, or prions, I should say, which again, pretty crazy to think that it seems to be we had ancestors who were still getting impacted by this disease, and natural selection's been working to develop resistance to it in a few people. Okay, so let's break down what those videos covered once again, just to make sure you're feeling good about this. Kuru is just another example of a prion disease, right? Just like mad cow disease in cows. But again, Kuru is in humans, along with the CJD. So again, symptoms is neurological degeneration, the shaking that you saw in the video, but the key is that eventual death, right? People who develop this syndrome don't last very long. And I've seen it in children and adults. There's pictures and videos all over the place. It's mostly amongst women and children, and that was because they think in Papua New Guinea, it was because of this ritualistic, the Foray people, as part of their funerals, they consume body parts of the people who died. In particular, the men would eat the muscles, as he said, and women and children eat the brains. So they think this is another explanation as to why this disease was suddenly being reported in children and women more than in the men. And again, I think this is a practice that has since been stopped because of the spread of this disease. But pretty fascinating and scary. So the last and most common form of this prion disease in humans is this Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And I had another kind of short Mayo Clinic video on this, but I didn't get to include it. But it's a very rare condition, right? It came to the awareness of public health after the mad cow outbreak in the UK because suddenly numbers of this disease also rose. And again, it could just be coincidence, but they think these two are associated, that the consumption of contaminated meat products led to a rise in this disease. Symptoms include, again, rapid and progressive dementia, psychiatric symptoms, including, like I looked up at things like agitation, hallucinations, the shaking, again, that we saw. And unfortunately, it has a 100%, again, fatality rate, setting it higher than rabies in terms of its deadliness, but again, incredibly rare. And there are no existing cures or treatments as of yet. And another, due to its rarity, there isn't a lot of funding or motivation going into looking for solutions to this. And hopefully it won't become widespread enough to require that. And again, it's fascinating that some humans do seem to show genetic resistance. They were kind of afraid after the outbreak in the UK, because of the long incubation period that these proteins can go through. They thought that maybe it was going to become a slow epidemic, that because a lot of people had picked it up, but wouldn't show symptoms for 5 or even 10 years down the road. But again, it's been so long now and they haven't seen that. So they do think that it might be a genetic thing, that there are, of the people who develop the disease, they seem to have these more recessive genes that are rare, but seem to make them a little more vulnerable to symptoms of prion disease. Whereas other people, we might have it, but we just don't manifest it because we have this genetic resistance, which I thought was pretty interesting. And this is just another breakdown of exactly what's going on, right? So it's kind of summarizing the whole thing in general. It's a brain disease, punches hole in your brain. Again, that's why it has that spongiform name. And it's all because just one little protein gets misfolded and can transform other healthy proteins then into that same form. All right, any questions or comments on that? Scary stuff. I was actually, I grew up in Europe, in Italy. My dad worked for the UN, and so I was in Europe when the mad cow disease outbreak occurred. And so for a short time, I remember with blood donor tests, if you're ever going to go donate blood, you had to answer questions. And one of those was, were you living in Europe in the early 1990s when this mad cow disease outbreak happened? So that's a box I have to check. But again, I haven't shown any symptoms, but it was something everyone was afraid of. It was kind of caused a lot of hysteria for a bit. Okay, I know I've shown you a lot of videos. There's one last thing I wanted to show you. Again, I'm a big movie buff. And so, actually, hold on before I share my screen here. How many people have seen the Denzel Washington film, The Book of Eli? It actually just popped up on Netflix, I think. They bought the rights to it. But okay, just going to show you a short clip from that movie. It's a post-apocalyptic film. It's the premise is that a religious war has laid waste to the whole world, and Denzel Washington's this guy who's kind of trekking through. But this is a moment where they run into this strange house with these two people living in it in an otherwise completely barren, deserted area. So it's this kind of bizarre scene. But there's a reference to this, what we've been discussing.
How about some music? It's so soothing. George. How do you like it? Nice? Please. Is that good?
Good.
Ready.
It's amazing that you two have survived out here all by yourselves.
Well, now, George is something of a handyman. He did a lot of work on this place, making it safe. We may be old, but we're resilient. We've no more than a few tried to take this place from us. Haven't we, George?
Yes, we have.
Right.
I want to show you something. Come on.
George, no. Not now.
Come on.
Are these...
Graves? Sure. Be uncivilized not to bury them.
Besides, it's good for the soil.
Come on back inside. I think I might be able to rustle you up some sandwiches.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We gotta go now.
They killed all these people.
They didn't just kill them, they ate them.
Her hands were shaking.
Too much human meat. Let's go.
So you might have heard that reference in other movies too, but right there at the end, what did he say about why their hands were shaking?
Wasn't it because like they ate all the dead people?
Yeah, they were cannibalizing others. And so that's a reference again to the tendency of if you're especially eating any brain matter or even cerebral spinal fluid or infected blood, you are probably getting prion disease. So it's possible that's a reference to that. You see this in other movies too, where cannibalism is mentioned. If anyone's seen The Road or anything like that, that's like a common symptom that they show is people shaking. And again, but it's not fictional. It is based on this idea of prion diseases. That's one of the symptoms due to the neurodegenerative effects of these proteins. So pretty crazy. All right. Any questions or comments? It's a good movie. You should check it out if you're curious about that. I think it is on Netflix or Amazon Prime or one of those places. I just saw it pop up. So, all right, kids. Then your homework is just to do a short reading in Gladwin. It's chapter 33. It's only 3 pages of text, and as usual, submit a photo of 1 page of your notes. And there is a reading quiz you have up to 10 attempts on, and it'll all hopefully just be a review of what we covered today. Questions on that? All right, we're a few minutes early, but I'm okay with that. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.